Katelyn Beaty, Roxy Stone, co-hosts of the Saved in the City podcast presented by Religion News Service. Thank you guys for being back. It's good to have you.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Let's do a little voice identification. Katelyn, what does your voice sound like?
It's the deeper one and the one that sounds a little sarcastic all the time.
Okay, Katelyn is the you can't tell if it's like Midwest nice or if it's really biting and sarcastic.
Well, that's how Midwesterners deal with their negative emotions.
Right, so I'm told.
Yeah. Mask it in niceness.
Yeah. Okay. And then Roxy, what's your voice sound like?
Just genuinely nice. So sweet.
I would say Roxy, you have the more, it might also be mic choice. You have the more NPR sounding voice. So if we can imagine you listing off the names of everybody worked on this serial episode, at the end of the episode, then if that's what it sounds like, then it's Roxy.
I'll take it.
Okay. So you guys, I've had you on before. I've mentioned your podcast even additionally since then. I think it's a really great resource. I will just describe it to my listeners in a way that I think is accurate, and you guys feel free to quibble or change anything. But, you both have spent a lot of time in overt evangelical spaces, places like the Barna Research Group, places like Christianity Today, and have both been in kind of that world of media. Katelyn, you also are at Brazos Press, working in like kind of, I would say, for my listeners, the more relevant side of Christian publishing, the kinds of books that, like I've had, your authors on the show, for instance. It's not like Zondervan. But you guys occupy this place.
I didn't pay you to say that.
No, I know. Yeah. No free ads. Or actually all free ads. Yeah. Right. The only ads are read by other people on this show. But that's just to say, like, I've appreciated your guys' work at each of those organizations. And so I was excited when you guys started your own show. And I would say that you occupy an interesting place. It's definitely still the world of American Protestantism, but it is not in a cringy way. It's in a way that I still feel like I genuinely enjoy engaging with your podcast. And I think you guys also just you approach a lot of really interesting topics on the show. And one of the kind of sets of topics you guys approach is gender issues. You've done a masculinity episode. It's sort of the masculinity crisis of men and boys episode with Christine Emba, who I may get on this show at some point if I can. But also it's come up on other episodes. You talk about the bro code at these various institutions. You're just kind of in those waters. And I thought, as I do this kind of ongoing series of episodes on quote unquote masculinity crisis or just masculinity in general, a topic I've just become quite interested in and that I think matters right now. I thought you guys would be a couple of voices to get in on the discussion. So that's what we're doing today. And I'm glad that you're here.
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to try and name one of you at a time for questions so that you don't know. This is behind the scenes podcasting stuff. But when I've been on like with Sari or other friends of mine or collaborators, it's like, who answers what? And it's annoying. So we'll start with you, Katelyn. Who decided this like masculinity crisis or male men and boys crisis? This is something worth covering on the show. Where did that come from for you guys?
I mean, Roxy and I have just an ongoing conversation on Slack about different things that we're reading and thinking about. And Christine Emba's Washington Post essay last summer on the masculinity crisis was a fantastic piece of reporting. It was
so good. Yeah.
In depth. We had her on before. So, cool. We, as you noted, Dan, we have touched on gender dynamics in the church and culture many times, but gosh, it just seemed like the masculinity crisis was in the air last year and
beyond the church, which is interesting too, right? Like it's broken into like a wider social conversation, not about egalitarianism and complementarianism and all that stuff.
Right. It's much broader. It's much more systemic. I think it's much more acute. And when you look at the rates of, gaps in education, job prospects, but also, very sadly, things like deaths of despair, rates of addiction, something has gone wrong. And, speaking personally, I think it can be easy. We talked about this on the Saved by the City episode. Like, as card-carrying feminists, why should we care about the masculinity crisis? Like, haven't men had their day in the sun? It's very, very long sunrise, sunset. Like, okay, but let's really focus on gender parity, because it's obvious that in many ways we haven't reached gender parity. But at the end of the day, men are people, and we are in relationship with men whom we love and care about. And for women to thrive, men have to be thriving too. It's not actually a zero-sum game. It's the sexes rise and fall together. And I think that's kind of where we landed in our conversation with Christine.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think for us, this is always like, there's like a low-key frustration, I think, maybe sometimes really high-key frustration among many of us women in New York, in particular Christian women, of just like, what is going on with the guys? Why are they so awful? And I think, a big part of our show has been about being single in the city and dating in the city, and as Christian women trying to maybe match with other Christian men. I think we've talked about this many times, of just how often we can get together at a table of a bunch of Christian women and be like, how is it possible that all of these amazing women are single and cannot find guys? And it's just sort of like, what is happening? And you go to church in the city, and it's like, either there are not very many men there at all. The single men who are there are some often gay, or the men that are there are married. Like the men that you might be like, there's a reason that they're married, Right. So it just kind of, we started to feel like that's just another aspect of this too, is like, what is going on, particularly in Christian circles, that has created such a huge gap between like the number of Christian men in the pews versus women, and the quality. That sounds really bad, but I'll say it anyway.
It's refreshing and bracing for you to be honest about the shit quality of these guys you can date in New York City. Somehow making me feel better about myself too. Katelyn, I love that you brought up the topic of zero-sum outcomes. If it's good for us, it's bad for them. There are obviously some areas, especially I think executive job positions in big companies, that are technically zero-sum. There are Fortune 500 companies. They have so many executive positions, and very few of them are held by women. And that's something that I would like to see change. But I agree with you that beyond a handful of items like that, like, people don't have to get bad SAT scores. Everybody could get better SAT scores. We could start a bunch of companies. If 50,000 companies are started this year, they could be better or worse companies. Like, not everything is zero sum like that. And so I appreciate that. But I'm wondering how you guys got there to not seeing it as zero sum.
Yes, of course, there are certain metrics of success that, just from a quantitative perspective, are like, well, as you said, Dan, there's only so many. But I feel like, the conversation about numbers of men and women in CEO positions is important, but it's actually it's a very small slice of what we are talking about when we're talking about not just gender parity, but talking about like human flourishing. Like 99.9% of the people in the world are not going to rise to the level of CEO. And we haven't even talked about metrics of human flourishing besides pay and
finances,
leadership, right?
Yeah.
Like, maybe we shouldn't aspire to be CEOs because those people seem pretty miserable and their family life is falling away.
I like that. Yeah.
I think when we're talking about the genders rising and falling together, what we're talking about is something more maybe harder to quantify, but more human and more interpersonal. I mean, Roxy's already described how some of these dynamics play out in the dating world. And it's obvious that whatever is going on with various masculinity scripts that are available to young men right now that kind of emphasize dominance and physical strength and virility. Am I allowed to say virility on this show?
You can say fuck on this show if you want to. You can say anything.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not allowed to say it on ours.
Caitlin's always holding back on that. So.
That's the difference between our shows. Yeah.
I've been holding it for a while. Like whatever is going on with men on the dating apps is having a negative outcome for women, like in terms of expectations on first dates, in terms of rates of sexual violence, in terms of thinking of commitment and monogamy and settling down and supporting a family as being like weak or feminized. There's something in the water just when it comes to dating for men and women where women are saying, I'm displeased with what's out there. Like I'm not happy with the situation. So yeah, I think of course there are like certain ways of measuring parity that are zero sum. But when we're talking about things at a human interpersonal level, I think it's clear, like we're all in this together.
So in that sense, you're not saying, look, we are women who fancy ourselves to be good people, and so therefore we should have you might also be saying, therefore we should have compassion on men. You're saying like also literally, as we can attest, it hurts us too that these guys are fuck ups.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying, that the rationale is rather self-centered.
No, I'm not saying no.
But also,
I'm saying that there are multiple reasons, and there are like reasons that would help yourself, and there are reasons that are selfless, and the converging reasons is what I would say. Yeah.
Yes. You can have multiple reasons for caring about the state of men.
To be blunt, also, when men aren't doing well, men take out a lot of their frustration violently sometimes, aggressively sometimes, and a lot of these conversations that are being had on these deep, dark, scary places on the internet are violent, and they're often very violent toward women or violent toward other minorities. And so part of the conversation that's being fed in a really dark way online is how men should take back what's theirs. And it's not pretty, and it's kind of scary as a woman to venture into those places. And I think we're seeing that come out in all kinds of ways, from mass shootings to domestic violence to even like broader scale, like political violence around the world. I think there are scary implications for what happens when men sort of have been fed an idea of who they're supposed to be, and then that's been taken away from them. And I'm not saying that they should have that, like they should have all the power, or they should have, dominance in society. And so now that but it's like, that's still the script that they're often being fed. And so then when they don't get it, there's a lot of frustration. And I think that's a broader point that to go off of what Katelyn has been talking about how this isn't just about like, how do we give men back good salaries and good jobs and, better SAT scores. And part of what I think the conversation needs to be, and never really was since sort of the feminist revolution, was like redefining what success looks like. So we sort of said, okay, what's successful in this world is to make a lot of money, to have a position of leadership, to have status outside the home, to, maybe be elected president, whatever, these positions of power. And so what happened in a lot of ways was it just was like, okay, for there really to be parity in the world, women need those positions. But there was never a conversation about like, is that really the best thing? Is that really what we should be going for? Like, what about some of the things that women have been doing? Why wouldn't that be great for men to be doing those things as well? Like elder care or child care or volunteering or, teaching elementary school or high school or any of these things, like positions that just kind of keep getting shoved down on the ladder. Like now women don't want those positions in some ways either. And so, but it's like, those are really valuable things for society. And so part of the conversation I think that needs to happen is like, how do we get parity in those places? How do we get men interested in positions that actually contribute to human flourishing that have always been deemed feminine, instead of just trying to get women to take over men's positions?
No, I think that's great. So to that end, one of the things that I'm asking people in these episodes is whether they've come across, or if they're putting forward their own visions of like, a fresh vision of masculinity that's not about, domination and just physical strength and fucking John Wayne and Marlboro Reds and all that stuff, So I'm wondering if you guys, have you come across any of these sort of positive replacements that you have found compelling? Have men in your life, talked about things that they find compelling? Obviously not the ones in your DMs, but others maybe that you love and cherish?
The guys in my DMs are just like sweet Christian dorks.
Oh, yes.
They're not John Wayne.
I know. I'm probably one of them. I'm not in your DMs.
Not in your DMs.
I'm a sweet Christian dork. Sweet Christian dork is pretty accurate. If I hadn't been in a rock band, I mean, I would just be the dorkiest of dorks. I'm riding that to my grave. When in my 20s, I was cool,
Yeah. It feels like such a easy, it feels like an easy thing to point to, but I am thinking of my dad, who served in the military, in the Marine Corps for 20 years. And my parents have had a relatively traditional division of labor. My dad has been the sole breadwinner, or primary breadwinner. My mom, when we were young, was primarily responsible for childcare and the home. Yeah. And he's, he's always cared about physical fitness. And, I could list off like a number of things. Like, yeah, he's this like traditionally masculine man, but he was always present and caring as a father. I've seen my dad cry more than my mom. He loves bird watching and baking. Like, I just think of my dad as someone who doesn't need to fall back on like super rigid masculinity tropes because he's secure in himself as a person. And I think some of that too is I think about kind of virtue and character, like things like long-term commitment to a community or organization or a church. Like both my parents are very much like stayers. Like they commit to people and places for the long haul. Like, well, what's to say that is not a masculine virtue? Like you could frame it to make it slightly more palatable to bros, but I'm thinking about, some of the traditional virtues or traditional character that could be reframed to be like, like real men love their babies. So
yeah, so this is always the next place that it goes, is like you're in your mind, or someone will say, well, aren't those things true for women? And part of me wonders if, these episodes are essentially a chance for me to process in real time. So thank you for being a part of that. Part of me wonders if it's not so much that we need a new masculinity. Maybe most of the virtues that we would consider a good manly man to have, or whatever, manly man's probably not the right term, but just like a good man. Maybe most of those virtues can be, there's a female version of that too. I wonder if it's more like about having dedicated spaces for men to work on being better together. And that maybe has its own problems, but that strikes me that that's a possible way forward, rather than it being about some new masculinity vis-a-vis the old masculinity, over and against that. And just like, can we not vilify men for spending time with each other? Can we create spaces for them to pursue these goals? I don't know.
Well, I will. Yes. I mean, I think that's all really important. I think one of the things that we've seen in really clearly in the data is that men are very lonely and they're very isolated, and actually building male friendship has been very difficult outside of institutions. So, men at one point in time had the Lions Club and the Rotary Club and the, or maybe the Rotary Club was mostly women. I can't remember. But anyway, the Lions Club,
all the ones that are like
Masons,
sort of,
all those,
exactly.
they're all sort of, or in the army, or, there were a lot of societies or institutions that had been built like in a lot of ways to help people in general, but often men to form these sort of friendships. And women just seem societally more equipped to have friendships outside of institutions. And I think right now the numbers are like, I don't want to quote stats out of hand. But it is like most men can't say they have one or fewer like really close friends.
Yeah.
And that's not good. And that's contributing to this isolation. And then in addition to that, more of them people are working from home. You've got the suburbs, you're further away from people. You're all these things that make people more and more isolated. And if you're married, maybe you have your partner, your wife to rely on as a man, but then we've got more and more who aren't married. And anyway, it's not that healthy to just rely on a spouse. So it's, I think that's part of what we're seeing. So I'm not against, I actually think this idea of like spaces where men can help find friendship and build friendship and have that be built around some healthy things, not just tropes of masculinity. Like, I think that could be really great. I would like to also pivot a little and say that I think some of what is difficult to have about this conversation is that, like so many things, I think there's policy and systemic issues that need to be addressed. So, and maybe this is too far afield of your question, but, I think there are ways within churches, for example, or within society at large, where like a type of job that it could be great for men to do, like teach Sunday school. Those positions have been devalued in a certain way, and both like ideologically at a church, but also if you're talking society at large, like teachers are one of the lowest paid public positions out there. And that has traditionally, because that's traditionally been women's work, it's become devalued, and it's become financially devalued. And so I think there are ways where if we really want to stem this, because some of this happens in I'm forgetting the guy's name who wrote that recent book around the masculinity crisis. But he
Richard
talks about,
Reeves.
Yes, thank you. He talks about how it's very possible for his sons to never interact with other adult males. They, their pediatrician, all their teachers are women. Their PE teacher is a woman. Their pediatrician is a woman. Like everyone that they interact with in terms of adults are all women. And so they're not even being like given adult role models, male adult role models. And that's something that a church could step in and help there. But there's also like a real conversation to be had at like a policy level around why these sort of childcare positions, or any kind of position that touches like children's lives, like even a doctor, is always coded as female. And part of that's pay.
Roxy, when you mention, institutions, I can't remember who wrote this, but I read something recently about how if we think about the last 50 or 60 years in American life institutionally, obviously the power and membership levels of all institutions has gone down across the board. So that's affecting men and women. It's one of the major causes, I believe, of political and socio-political polarization is that people are not involved in a bowling league anymore. They're not involved in anything where they have to learn to be friends with people who differ from them sociopolitically. And there's other things too, like the big sort, people moving to the suburbs and exurbs, or exurbs and rural, or staying in urban and suburban areas if they're more liberal. But there's also been, so this is not the only thing, but there has been this interesting thing with institutions that were once gendered, where mostly what's happened, if there has been a change, is that the male gendered ones have become open to women. And that makes sense, especially when you think of first or second wave feminism, when we're talking very basic gains here that need to be made. And these are the smoky rooms of power and influence. And so we need to get women into those rooms. Like, I think that's legitimate.
As much as men for us to have gender parity.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because you guys have to die from lung cancer and emphysema at similar rates in order for us to have parity.
We still live longer. I'm just putting that out there. But.
Just no matter what we do, you fuckers. No, but like Boy Scouts of America opening up to girls.
Yeah, right.
But there's no boys in the Girl Scouts. The YMCA becoming all gender, but the YWCA is still for women only. And I think that we understand what that's about is because we from sort of still fresh from 50 years ago, and in some ways, as you mentioned earlier, Katelyn, still true today. Like there is that kind of male over female hierarchy. But it seems like one of the consequences of that has maybe been, and then all those things like the Lions Club and the Rotary, all these kind of World War II vet, Vietnam vet kind of adjacent, all that stuff has shrunk too. So you're left with sports, basically.
Which is not small.
Which is not small, no.
For the record.
But sports can also be experienced like you're watching TV by yourself with your DraftKings app open on your phone, betting on the games.
Right.
And maybe you're texting with your football buddies or whatever. But it isn't the same as regular, long-term, in-person relationship building.
Yeah, you're talking about the need for institutions that are coded as male that don't feel exclusive when it comes to power and influence. Like, is there a way to carve out male coded institutions or communities that don't feel exclusive or broy in a bad way?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, there's someone I follow on Instagram who I hate follows too strong, but like I follow to see what he's up to, and he's organizing this men's retreat, and it's, highly advertised, and it's designed for Christian men. And there's something about it that I just am like, oh, right. But I am coming around. Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about a crisis of masculinity, there have to be conversations and spaces that men are having together in places of real connection and community that are exclusive to their experience. And maybe there are aspects of that are more cringy and less cringy. Like if they go throw axes at a wall, that's probably okay. They could be doing a lot worse things to kind of express their masculinity. So I feel like I'm coming around to what I have long felt like more cheesy elements of masculinity, if in the grand scheme of things are relatively innocuous and men are actually finding a lot of meaning and community there.
I'm curious about that process of coming around because I think, and speaking as a man, so this is not on my shoulders, so it's easy for me to say, but I think that one of the problems with this current moment is that it is well known how cringy women and many men find these masculine spaces and activities to be. It's like, I think about, it might have been 10 years ago. No, it must have been like 5 or 6 years ago now. Meryl Streep talking at the Oscars and she's talking about how, all these muscle men in tights running and hitting each other. And, that's not, we can do better in America. And it's supposed to be this thing about the arts
tights.
or whatever.
What is she talking about?
Oh, okay. She's talking about football. Yeah, I'm paraphrasing.
Men in tights. The
ballet. We're talking about
Brooks's,
Marvel or something.
Mel Brooks's Robin Hood film.
Yeah, exactly.
But she's like, she was saying the quiet part out loud, essentially, of like, we think you're fucking ogres, and we have something higher and more beautiful and more valuable, and like men know that that's what women think of men's stuff, and it's not all women and it's not all the stuff, but that's not a secret. And so I'm curious, I kind of want to know more about how you have worked like what was the process like for you of coming around on that, because I think that needs to happen. Candidly, a lot of us need to come around in a similar way and stop telegraphing that disdain that we have for these subcultures.
Yeah. Want to take this one, Roxanne?
Sure. I mean, I've actually come around on it too. Like I would have said, I spent a lot of in particular my 20s thinking that every time gender separation happened, that it was bad, because it was contributing to men staying in power. And I have come around to thinking that we need these spaces as well. Just maybe not as extremely or as often or as like with such power dynamics. But
sure.
I think the cringy part is interesting. It's interesting for me to hear you say that it's well known that people find this cringy. And I think there's some truth to that. And I think as a woman, I'm familiar with that because men have been cringing at women's sleepovers and
absolutely
and shopping outings forever. So, but we also know that we have a really good time, and we also kind of know that thing that we're doing isn't really the point. That the point is the community, and the friendship. I don't love crafting parties, and I don't go to crafting parties, but I know that when my mom does, she comes back really happy and had a good time. And I have found my own, spaces to hang out with women, whether it's a recent all day spa day that Katelyn and I did with a couple of other girlfriends. Like, I definitely could see some men making fun of that. But we had a great time, and we were girly at certain moments. We talked about girly things and made fun of men sometimes. And I mean, it was a very typical, exactly the stereotypical day you might have imagined. We did not have cosmopolitans, but otherwise,
no one had any Appletinis, but otherwise you checked all the boxes. Yeah.
But the point
sounds
was the
frankly
friendship.
Wonderful to me.
It was great. And I think that, if men go bowling, if they go axe throwing, if that's not the point, which is what I think a lot of these kind of Christian men's groups tried to make the point. Like the point is how masculine we are. The point is how strong we're getting and how we're embracing adventure by throwing axes in the woods because men want to rescue a beauty and
we're back to Wild at Heart, John Eldridge and all that bullshit.
So, but it's like if you make that the point, then it's cringy. But if the point is let's all hang out and this is something we enjoy doing together, then the sort of the what you do is not it. It could be a lot of things.
Yeah. That's a really good point. It's not the thing itself. It's the connection and the community and the conversation and the friendship that is formed by doing the thing. And I admit that some of this is like, I would never, I find Meryl Streep's commentary. I mean, I love Meryl Streep.
So do I. I mean, who are you kidding?
But
absolutely.
Yeah, I
Desert
do
Island actor for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I find some of the disdain for traditionally masculine activities to be snobby, to be like a kind of upper class liberal posture toward whatever, I don't know, working class, middle class men enjoy and find interesting. And I acknowledge that is probably at play when I'm Like in the same way that like when I see camo Crocs, I'm like, oh my gosh, right? But like some people out there like camo Crocs and they're apparently very comfortable. So I acknowledge that some of it is just kind of snobbery. And like, now I will say that I think there are masculine coded activities that are harmful or perpetuate very unhelpful tropes about what it means to be a man. I probably am not going to advocate for men like, oh, our men's activities like going to the strip club or like,
or we're gonna do a book club on the game and how to like nag girls and maximize the sex that you get.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
That's a book, by the way, if people don't know.
Yes,
That's a famous serial dating book called The Game.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there has to be a space to say, this isn't my cup of tea. I probably wouldn't end up with a man who's really into this thing, but it's relatively innocuous. And just because I don't like it aesthetically doesn't mean it's not valuable for some people.
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me that we can also distinguish between like cringe factor and what can feel like danger, you know? And so, and I think that I do think that sometimes we get sloppy around that. Whereas we might call something dangerous that is actually just culturally cringy to us.
Like
or
what?
Maybe,
like when you say danger, do you mean perpetuating dangerous stereotypes or?
I guess I mean it in two ways, but slightly the kind of more overt, obvious, like this could actually lead to dangerous activities or unhealth in the case of kind of things we've been talking about. But I actually think that probably, and this might just be kind of in more left-leaning circles, that the more common fear that this is dangerous does go back to if it's all the men together, then they will perpetuate misogyny and patriarchy. That's the danger. Is it will, as they listen and become friends and connect with each other, that ultimately this will only serve to sort of perpetuate a boys' club in some way or other. And you guys have both worked. Well, actually, I don't know as much about your employment history, Roxy, but Katelyn, I know you've written at length about the boys' clubs that you've experienced in, for instance, evangelical institutions, and that's a real problem. But if every boys' hangout is coded as a boys' club that will lead to inequity, it doesn't take a lot of insinuation for guys to pick up on that and then to feel disincentivized. Like I'm thinking of like the average listener of my show who's a male is not we're not, guys don't come to me because I'm a fucking man's man. That is not, whatever I'm doing well, that's not the thing I'm doing well. And I can imagine them being like, well, maybe I won't go out with the guys. Like maybe I won't go do that thing because I don't, maybe my wife or my girlfriend or my friends will, it doesn't take a lot to disincentivize someone, right? If they get the point, they get the cue that it's seen that way by one or more people in their life that are important to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't totally know how to solve that other than I think maybe there's a difference in kind a little bit between like the smoky room where all the men in leadership gather and exclude women versus like some best friends getting together for a beer every Tuesday night to chat about life. So, I mean, I think maybe that's like, I do think that misogyny can certainly be perpetuated at the bar on Tuesday night with the best friends. Like there's just no getting around that other than that those men are not being misogynistic or calling each other out when they are, and that's what we're all trying to do better in our various biases. So, I think there's also a space for women to recognize when it's healthy and when it's not too. And to say, I don't need to be there. I don't need to be in that space. I do need to be in the smoky room with the leadership at my company. Right. And so but I don't need for every time my husband was out to be along with them, or for everything to be men and women together. Like, it's good that there's that space. So yeah, that's not a full answer to your question, but I think it's important for men to have those spaces for sure.
I feel like because you guys have thought about this and you're really thoughtful on it, you're good sports. We've actually spent more of this time kind of talking about what women can do to help men. And since we just have 10 minutes left, I want to make sure to have some space for you guys talking to us. So, you've mentioned this kind of personal experience you guys have been drawing on, dating and otherwise. Like, where, if there's a crisis for men, it's not like the entire crisis can be laid at society's feet or women's feet. Obviously, like, we are a part of the problem as well. And I'm curious what you guys have seen. Like, if I'm wanting to be keeping an eye out for the more toxic types of male culture or masculinity, or just anything that you've noticed that, like, okay, we're listening. You've got a bunch of us now listening to take some notes.
You've given us way too much power.
Yeah, but I've time limited it by waiting until the end of the episode.
That's true.
Yeah.
What, maybe I could phrase it this way. What do you wish the guys that you might meet for friendship or romantic reasons, what do you wish they were doing differently or learning or focusing on or what? What would you be pumped if this came up on a first date or, at beers or something?
Obviously, in a dating relationship, and I know, some men would be like, women want it both ways. You're always, you can't do it right, man. But maybe they're not listening right now. Yeah, that was all men who think this way. So it is absolutely imperative to me that I would try to be with a man who is not threatened by a strong woman. Like, that's just kind of, and not in a, like, I got to take the reins. Like, not in a doormat way. I don't want to, but actually what I'm trying to say is a man who is strong enough in himself to not be intimidated by a woman who is strong in herself and has a full life on her own. I think, especially in maybe more Christian or conservative Christian circles, you kind of quickly realize, okay, there's a kind of tacit interest in, like, yes, I'm super interested in, like, a strong, ambitious woman. And then when it comes to difficult decisions or, like, thinking about a life together, it's like, oh, wow, I don't think you are. Like, I think you are maybe unconsciously assuming a kind of way of living together, being together that makes me secondary, or I'm in service to your career. And so that's obviously a problem.
That's like the dating version of, dude, we love gay people at this church. Like, we want to welcome any of them here at this Baptist church to, like, worship God with us together,
Yeah, like a good lip service, but not actually how
until they want to be on the worship team or something like that, and then the shit hits the fan. Right.
Yeah. I'll just say what also comes to mind is men who think of emotional intelligence as being part of what it means to be a strong, healthy man. Because being a strong and healthy man means being a strong and healthy person, and all people need to dig into their stuff and deal with it. And just self-awareness, looking at someone like, how did my childhood and how did the masculinity tropes that were given to me by my dad or by my church or by popular culture, like, how did that affect me? How have I felt like I couldn't show up as my full self because I've been living with these narratives and tropes? So someone who's done the inner work is great.
Yeah.
I just want to take a little note there, almost for myself as much as anything else, that, like, there's probably a way of individualizing this, kind of like I would do with a client who was doing like values work or goal articulation, where it's like, what does it mean for me to be strong? Like, being strong is a part of being a man and a woman, but either way, what does it look like for me to be strong? What types of strength have I seen modeled? Which ones of those are healthy? Which ones of those do I relate to? Because there's a lot of different ways to be strong. I don't think anybody would say that strength is not one of the features of masculinity. However we define strength or masculinity, like, that's always going to be on there. But there's different ways of conceiving of that. There's types of strength. There's emotional strength. It's like, well, I'm strong in the way that I'm bedrock for the people in my life. That guy might be an accountant, like, and super strong, right? So interesting.
I think some things that I pay attention to that I think are important, and I should clarify that I'm not single anymore, but I think that a really robust friendship network was a really critical factor for me. Like, I wanted to hear that you were not alone and isolated.
Yeah.
And either having pushed everyone away from you or just not able to connect in a way, or would need that kind of emotional support without having a network.
That's good.
So whether that's through church or whether that's through, still being friends with somebody that you met in college 15 years ago, just that like longevity of friendship was really important to me. And then I think one of the biggest red flags for me, besides seeing a Jordan Peterson book in your backseat, was which happened.
It sounds too specific to be
I was like,
hypothetical.
This is the end
That's
of
not
this
hypothetical.
date. Thank you. but a big red flag for me is just like, for a few years toward the end of my dating in the last couple of years, I felt like a lot of guys I went out with were really angry and defensive and had like, really did feel a little like I was at a pity party of just like, oh, everything's changed so much and this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. And it's like, I didn't have a lot of patience for that. And I think those were two things that I would look for on either side, like good and like green flag, red flag.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, we need to wrap up. I do just really quickly, Roxy. I do think that probably some people will think like a Jordan Peterson book, that's an example though of like, really like there's no 12 rules for life. Like, that's really disqualifying. Obviously, a lot of the stuff, in my personal opinion, so much of what he has said and put out in the world is disgusting. But then some of it is like pretty innocuous and
like make your
it's
bed.
almost like which Jordan Peterson stuff is the person drawn to.
That's true. That's true.
But
I would clarify that. But also I think there's something to probably for me, that was a flag because of things that Peterson has said since writing those books.
Yeah.
But also I felt like what I would hear a lot, it was a little bit of a dog whistle of sorts, where it sort of was like, okay, where if a guy said, well, he's not all bad. He's got some good ideas, and then I would be like, sort of like Katelyn would be like, I'd be like waiting for the what's underneath this.
What's
what are
coming
you
next?
really?
Yeah.
So like, what am I about to hear about how like women just can't do what men can do out there in the world because of the lobsters and hierarchy. So I mean, I just kind of it just kind of was like this moment of like,
this could go.
I don't know.
This could go in a lot of different directions.
Yeah. Well, we got to wrap up. You guys have a heart out. Thank you so much. We'll put a link to Saved in the City in the show notes.
It's Saved by the City.
Sorry, gosh. We'll put a link to Saved by the City in the show notes. I know that. I know it's Saved by the City.
I know you know.
Yeah.
But
Sex
I want
in
your
the City,
listeners to know.
It always.
I know. There's like Sex in the City and Saved by the Bell.
Saved by the
and
Bell.
We just, we had to like mash it.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Thanks for this conversation.